My dad looked at me across the table and said, "Your sister is independent. Strong. She's never needed our help. Not like you." He said it like it was just a fact, like he was reading it off a report card. Meg didn't even flinch. She just kept scrolling through her phone like she didn't hear it, like it wasn't about me. That's when I smiled and said, "Wonderful. The credit card I added her to gets canceled today." I said it with the same tone I use when I ask if anyone needs anything from the store. They thought I was being petty. I was being quiet. What they didn't realize was that I had already spent years covering for her groceries, rides, bills, nights out she never remembered paying me back for. They saw Meg as the one who had it all together, and me as the one always trying to keep up. What they never saw, what they refused to see, was who was holding the net under her. And I guess I was willing to hold it for a while. Until they made it clear they'd rather call her strong than call me seen. That's when I stopped holding it. And she fell hard. My name's Riley, 25, and technically between things, which is how I described unemployment to my dad when he asked last week, though it didn't matter what I said because he already had his script written. Sitting across from me in his stiff dress shirt that he always unbuttons halfway through dinner like he's settling into fatherhood, but really, he just wants space to tell me what I'm doing wrong, and this time it was, "Your sister's strong and independent," said casually between bites of steak. She never needed our help, unlike you, and I didn't flinch, but I tasted metal in my mouth anyway. Across from him, my sister Meg laughed at something on her phone, probably one of those reels she always sends me with a caption like, "This is so us," though we haven't been us in years, and I wonder if she even hears him say it. If it registers in her brain how much he wants a version of her in me, someone shinier, less delicate, easier to explain to his friends, and I don't know what hurts more. The comparison or the fact that he's not even hiding it anymore, like being disappointed in me, is part of his identity now. So I said something I didn't even mean to, it just came out like reflex. I said, "Wonderful," and smiled, because I knew what I was about to do, knew that the credit card I added her to in college, when she lost her wallet and dad said I should step up, was still open, still active, and being used, probably that same afternoon for her Uber or delivery or some kind of yoga mat she'd forget she ordered, and I waited, calm, like I was picking my moment in a conversation I wasn't supposed to win. She didn't look up, didn't blink, maybe didn't believe me, and I guess I didn't expect her to, not right away, because Meg lives in a world where she always lands on her feet, where she's got backup plans for her backup plans and friends who post about her like she's a hurricane in a good way, and I think she's always assumed I'd keep covering for her, because I always did, quietly, while she lived louder and brighter and more convincingly. The kind of person people call confident when really they just mean they don't notice who she's stepping on. Later that night, I sat at my desk, the one with chipped corners and a drawer that sticks unless you slam it, and I logged into my account, saw the name M. Bishop still listed under authorized users, and there was this moment, maybe 2 seconds, where I hovered over the remove button, because part of me remembered when we were kids and shared a bunk bed, and she used to ask me to read her sleepover notes from girls I never got invited by, and I don't know. Maybe I hoped she'd outgrow the part of her that took and never asked. But I clicked it, removed her name, then called the bank and canceled the whole card, and the weirdest part was how quiet it felt after, like I'd just vacuumed a really cluttered room and could finally see the floor again. And I guess that's what made me realize how long I'd been carrying it, how long I'd let myself be useful in a way that nobody called valuable, and I didn't tell anyone, didn't make a big deal of it, just shut the door gently and waited to see who noticed it was closed. The text came first, just her name lighting up my screen at 10:34 p.m. No words, just 3 dots for a while, then nothing, and I ignored it, brushed my teeth, tied my hair up for bed, and halfway through wiping off my mascara she started calling, first once, then again, and when I picked up on the 4th try, her voice wasn't angry yet, it was confused, the way people sound when their safety net vanishes, and they realize they weren't standing on solid ground, and she said, "Hey, something's wrong with the card," like it was a glitch. I didn't answer at first, just let the silence stretch long enough to feel real. Then I said, "Yeah, I know," and I could hear her blink, could hear the panic starting to bubble up in the back of her throat, and she asked if I'd accidentally locked it or something. Said she was trying to book a flight for this bachelorette trip, and she didn't want to ask Dad because he was already being weird about money, and that's when I said it, not loud, not cruel. Just said, I think it's time you stopped needing me, and then I hung up. The next morning, I woke up to a group chat pinging like a fire alarm. Meg had renamed it Emergency. Please read, and her messages were coming in fast, half caps, all blame. Who cancels a card without warning? I was booking a flight. Dio, you know how embarrassing this is. And the girls were chiming in with little shocked emojis and sarcastic gifs, some playing dumb, others fanning the flames. One of them asked if I'd been hacked or something, and I just stared at the screen, toothbrush in hand, wondering how long she'd been building a life off mine without blinking. She called again right after, her voice clipped like she'd been practicing. What's your problem? Seriously? And I didn't answer at first, just let the silence breathe, because I think I wanted to see if she'd say something true, something human, but instead she said, You couldn't have warned me? You couldn't have waited until after Vegas? I had everything lined up, and there it was, the hierarchy, the assumption that her convenience still outranked my boundaries, and it wasn't even anger in my chest this time, just this dull ache that felt a lot like shame for ever thinking I owed her silence. I didn't know I needed your permission, I said, and it landed sharp, because she went quiet for a second, then laughed, high and hollow, the way she used to when she'd get caught borrowing my stuff, and pretend it was no big deal. Riley, you're so dramatic, she said. Then added, God, you sound like Dad, and it hit harder than I expected, because I've spent most of my life trying not to sound like him, and here she was handing me the comparison like a weapon, like I was suddenly the cold one for choosing to be done being used. It wasn't just the flight, though, it never is. She'd been using that card for all kinds of things. Target runs, Uber Eats, that Airbnb for her friend's cabin birthday last fall that I only remembered when the charge popped up with a photo of them toasting in matching robes, all tagged #Cabin Queens while I sat at home eating eggs for dinner. And I think that was the first time I realized she doesn't see my help as help. She sees it as default, like I exist somewhere in the background to make her life smoother, and when I don't, I'm the problem. I didn't respond to her texts the rest of the day, let them stack up like laundry I didn't feel like folding, and around 4 p.m. She tried again, but this time it was Dad calling, his name showing up on my screen like a warning label, and I let it go to voicemail, listened later while I microwaved leftovers, his voice low like he was keeping it casual, but I know that tone. It's the one he uses when he's decided I'm the one making things difficult. Just give me a call when you get a chance, he said. We should talk. The last time we talked was when he asked why I didn't go to grad school like Meg, why I didn't just push through my burnout, and I remember trying to explain that I wasn't okay, that I was barely sleeping, barely eating, and all he said was, Everyone's tired, Riley. Like struggling was just laziness with a prettier name. So I knew what this call would be. I knew what side he was already on, and I wasn't in the mood to be his disappointment again, not with a voice that pretended it came from concern when it always came from control. By the time I checked Meg's Instagram, she'd already turned it into content, posted a story of her walking down a city street with a caption like, Nothing like betrayal to teach you who's real nail Polish medium skin tone, and I didn't even feel angry. Just exhausted. Because it's always been like this, her turning conflict into a performance, narrating her own victimhood before anyone else can speak, and the comments were already rolling in. Ugh, you deserve better, cut the toxic ones out, karma always spins back, and I closed the app, suddenly aware of how easy it is to rewrite a story when the audience never hears the other voice. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed scrolling through old messages, screenshots, bank alerts, things I'd saved without knowing why, the late-night Venmo requests with vague emojis, the "can you spot me until Friday" texts that never got followed up, the promise to switch the card over next month that lived in my inbox for 14 months, and I realized something I hadn't said out loud yet, even to myself, which is that it didn't feel like cutting her off, it felt like finally telling the truth. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty for saying no. Dad finally called again on Sunday morning, earlier than usual, like he wanted to catch me before I could avoid it, and I almost let it ring out again, but something in me was tired of dodging, so I picked up and said, "Yeah." Without the energy to soften it, and he jumped right in with, "She's upset," like I didn't know, like I hadn't watched the aftermath unfold in real time across 3 group chats and 5 Instagram stories, then added, "You didn't have to embarrass her like that." And I had to pause, had to look out the window to stop myself laughing. I said, "Embarrass her?" Real quiet, because I didn't want to yell. I just wanted to understand how we were already here, already back in that familiar space where I was the cause, never the one reacting, and he exhaled like he didn't want to explain. Like this conversation was already annoying him. "You know what I mean," he said. "She's struggling, Riley, and you made it harder," and I asked, "Did she tell you what I did?" And he said, "She said you cut her off during a trip, without warning," and I had to smile, not because it was funny, but because it was so familiar. So I asked, "Did she tell you whose card she was using?" And he went quiet, that pause where I could hear the shift in his posture, the one where he realized he didn't have the full story, but was already defending it, and then he said, "I mean, I assumed it was hers," and I said, "It's been mine since college." And his voice changed, just slightly, enough for me to hear it. "You never told me that," he said, and I wanted to say, "You never asked," but I didn't. I just let him sit in it for a second. He cleared his throat like he was trying to reset, then said, "She's your sister," and I said, "I know," and he said, "You two used to be close," and I wanted to ask when he thought that stopped, because I remember the day exactly. It was senior year of high school. The night she told him I'd skipped my SAT tutoring to go lie in a parking lot with my friends, staring at stars, and he called it selfish, said she was trying to help me, but he never asked why I skipped, never asked why I couldn't breathe that day, only blamed. I kept my voice steady, said, "She's not a bad person. She's just used to being protected," and he said, "Is that such a bad thing?" And I said, "It is when it costs someone else," and he sighed, that long tired sigh he's used my whole life like he's carrying us all, when really he's only ever carried her, and I think part of him believes love is measured in worry. And since she's the one who takes up space with her needs, she must be the one who matters most, and maybe that's not his fault, maybe it's just what he was taught. He said, "She looks up to you, you know," and I almost dropped the phone, because it was so strange, so distant from what I've lived, and I said, "She doesn't, she tolerates me," and he didn't argue, he just said, "You're different now, more distant." And I wanted to scream, wanted to say I'm distant because you only see me when I'm convenient, when I'm quiet, when I'm useful, but instead I said, "Maybe I'm just tired of feeling small," and he didn't respond, just exhaled again, like maybe he finally heard it, or maybe he just didn't know how to answer. Later that day, I got a voice note from Meg, her tone fake calm the way it gets when she wants something. "Hey, I talked to Dad. It's fine. I'll figure something else out, but like, next time, just be straight with me, okay? Don't blindside me," and I didn't respond, because it wasn't an apology, it was a script, and I've heard it before. The part where she pivots to pretending we're close again, like nothing happened. Like I didn't get called dramatic and selfish and disloyal for drawing one small line, and I just didn't have the energy to crawl back to that. That night, I made dinner for one, and for the first time it didn't feel sad, just simple, just mine, and I didn't check my phone, didn't scroll through her updates or reread our messages. I just sat with myself, quietly. Like I was getting reacquainted with someone I used to overlook, and it felt strange and soft and a little uncomfortable, like when you change your haircut and catch yourself in the mirror and don't recognize who you're becoming, but don't hate it either. And in the quiet, I didn't miss her voice, not even once. It started small, the way most things do. Just a story Meg posted that didn't quite land the way her others did, something about manifesting solutions, paired with a mirror selfie and 3 sparkle emojis, and I knew her code well enough to read between the lines. Knew she was talking about the hotel she hadn't been able to book for that girls' weekend, the one where she was supposed to split with Lauren but couldn't because her backup card had a fraud alert, which probably wasn't true, but it was easier to spin it than to admit something ran out. I didn't say anything, Didn't respond when she tagged me in a meme later that afternoon, something vague about siblings being chaos and comfort, and I wondered if it was bait, if she was waiting to see if I'd break first. If I'd slide back into our old rhythm where she pushes and I catch her, always, but I didn't, just kept scrolling, because I think something had shifted without me deciding, like I'd stepped into a room I didn't realize I was allowed to be in. One where I don't have to prove I'm hurt for it to matter. Then Lauren texted me, and that was unexpected. Hey, kinda random, but did something happen with you and Meg? She seemed off today, and I didn't want to pull anyone into it, but I also didn't feel like lying, so I said, we're taking space, and she replied, makes sense, and then, after a beat, she mentioned something about money stuff. I think she's stressed. And I could hear it under the words, the shift, the way people start noticing when the glitter wears off, and I wasn't glad, just oddly quiet, like watching something you planted begin to grow in real soil. A few days later, Dad came by unannounced, holding a to-go coffee like that made it casual, and I let him in because I didn't want to fight in the hallway, but it felt strange having him in my space. Like he was visiting a version of me he hadn't expected to survive on her own, and we made small talk for a bit, about my job search, the weather, his shoulder acting up again, and then he said, I gave Meg some help with her rent, like it was a confession. And I just nodded, didn't ask how much. Didn't ask why. She didn't tell me, he added, like that mattered, and I said, she doesn't usually, and he leaned back like that surprised him, like he'd assumed I was the one who kept secrets, and then he asked, are you two going to be okay? And I shrugged, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know how to explain the slow erosion of trust, how it doesn't break all at once, it just thins until one day you look down and there's nothing left holding you, and he didn't push, just sat there. Sipping coffee he said he didn't really like. Before he left, he paused in the doorway, like he wanted to say something useful, something weighty, and then all he said was, you're good on money though? And I smiled because it felt like the first time he asked me that, like really asked, and I said, yeah, I'm good, and I meant it, not because I had a lot, but because I finally knew where it went, and when he nodded, I saw something flicker across his face. Something almost like respect, or maybe regret, and for the first time I didn't feel like proving anything to him, just let him go. That night, I saw Meg post again, this time quieter, just a sunset photo and a caption about breathing through hard things, and I didn't react, but I read it twice, and I wondered if she meant it. If she was beginning to feel the weight of what she used to put on other people, and part of me wanted to reach out, ask if she was okay, tell her I'd always answer if she just said help instead of performing pain, but I didn't. Because I wasn't sure if that offer had already expired, or if I was the one who ended it. I made tea, sat on my floor, and watched the steam rise like a little ritual, small but mine, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like someone in the background of someone else's story, didn't feel like a spare part to a louder life. And I didn't know if this piece would last or if Meg would find a new way to fold me back into her script, but in that moment, I wasn't waiting for her next move, wasn't bracing for the apology that never really arrived. I was just still, and that was enough. Meg showed up at my apartment 2 weeks later, without texting first, standing in the hallway with sunglasses on even though it was cloudy, holding an iced coffee like it was armor, and I could already feel the rhythm of the scene before she said anything. The way she leaned on casual so it wouldn't feel like need, said, I was nearby, even though she lives 40 minutes away, and I opened the door because I didn't want to pretend I hadn't heard her knock, didn't want to be cruel, just careful, just tired of walking back into the same fire expecting rain. She sat on the edge of the couch like she might not stay long, looked around like it was her first time really seeing my place. The way the light hit the rug I found secondhand, the stack of books under the window, the kitchen sink that still drips when you forget to tighten the tap, and she said, you made this work, almost like she didn't mean to say it out loud, and I said, yeah, because I did, because I always have, even if it didn't look like winning to her. And she nodded once, just once, and didn't smile. There was a pause after that, not long, but long enough to notice, and she asked if I had oat milk, and I didn't, but I offered her water, and she said sure, like it didn't matter, but she sipped it slow like she was buying time, and when she finally looked at me, it wasn't guarded, it wasn't soft either, it was just real, just her, and she said, "You really canceled it," and I said, "Yeah," and she didn't argue, didn't ask why, just nodded again, like maybe she'd already played the fight out in her head and lost. She pulled her phone out, started to say something and changed her mind, then said it anyway. "I didn't realize how much I was leaning on you," and it wasn't an apology, but it was something close, something in the shape of one, and I didn't say it was okay. Because it wasn't, because it didn't have to be, but I said, "I know," and she looked down at her hands like maybe she didn't expect me to meet her there, like she thought she'd have to fight her way back in, and I didn't want to make her bleed for it. She started telling me about the rent, about the credit score she didn't check until it dipped, about the job offer she turned down last year because she thought something better was coming, and I didn't interrupt, just listened, and when she was done, she said, "I should have figured it out sooner," and I said, "Maybe," but there wasn't anger behind it, just space, and she asked, "Are we still okay?" And I could hear the part of her that never really asked that before, not out loud, because she always assumed we were, because I always made sure we were. I told her I didn't know yet, and she nodded like she deserved that, like maybe she was learning how to hold things without breaking them, and she didn't push, just sat there a little longer, tracing the rim of her glass with her finger, and then said, "I'm gonna head out," like she knew this wasn't the conversation that would fix everything, just the one that stopped the bleeding, and as I walked her to the door, she turned and said, "You were right to do it," and it wasn't dramatic, wasn't performative, just true, and I let it land. After she left, I stood there for a while, door still open, hallway still echoing with her perfume, and I didn't feel triumphant, didn't feel bigger or better, just still, just grounded, and I looked around at the things that were mine, the light, the quiet, the space between people learning where they end and where others begin, and I didn't feel guilty for how it ended, didn't wish I'd done it differently, just breathed out slowly, like I'd been holding it in for too long, and maybe I had. Maybe that's how you start again, by finally letting yourself exhale. Later that night, I made tea and opened a book I'd been meaning to finish, my phone quiet on the table beside me, and I didn't check it, didn't wait for the next text or the next storm, just sat there with the window open, the air cool and steady against my legs, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months, maybe longer. Myself, just myself, not the version she needed, or he expected, or I pretended to be, just the person who finally said enough and meant it, even if it took too long to get there. If this story hit somewhere real for you, if you've ever been the one who was expected to understand, to stay quiet, to give more than you got, go ahead and like this video. And if you want more stories that say the quiet part out loud, hit subscribe. We tell the truths people live but rarely speak.